Melinda hated driving at night. She did her best to avoid it. Short trips to the store if she just realized she ran out of tampons or had nothing for dinner after getting home. That sort of thing happened now and then, but she did her best not to go out after dark unless someone was coming to pick her up. So naturally, she found herself on the longest drive of her life tonight, with no moon, few stars, swirling clouds above her, and acres of forest on either side. So many unpleasant things in her life. This was her father's fault. She hadn't seen or spoken with the bastard in 15 years, but just after falling asleep tonight, no. That was wrong. It would be yesterday by this time. Out of the blue, her phone rang, and his voice was on the other end. "I need you, Millie. Please, come now." He said just that, and then the line went dead. The old ass was probably drunk, but he never called her before. Not since she was a child and he was still trying to convince her mother to take him back. It felt like she had been dreaming, but waking up to hear his voice again after all these years, it sounded like he was crying. His voice sounded just the same as the last time she heard it. As though in a dream, she had risen, dressed, and gotten in the car. She was well out of town and halfway to his old place, before realizing that she had no way of knowing if he even still lived there. She received updates from her mother from time to time over the years about where he was, but the last time she heard from her mother about him was 7 years ago. Had he ever even stayed in one place that long? Not to her recollection. She had been 7 when her mother finally had enough and showed him the door. Prior to that, a move had come every few months. The house they had been living in was their longest stay in one place. A full 16 months. It turned into 2 years after that, and then the next house had been the one she left when she moved out of her own. In all that time, she heard him from sporadical at the best, and had finally decided it was best just to simply forget about him until tonight. She had found out that after a 2-hour drive that she had been right to wonder if he was even in the same place. His last known address was a sketchy apartment in a low-income area of the town that she had grown up in. He had been number 24 or number 42? Maybe he was 14. It definitely had a 4. It didn't matter. His name wasn't on any of the buzzers. Bastard. Her drunk of a father had called her at night, all but demanding she come to him in reasons he didn't even feel were important enough to tell her over the phone, and then just expected that she would know where he lived at now. In a flurry of rage, she turned and marched back to her car, slamming the door and starting off in the direction she came. She was so angry she didn't even look where she was going and missed her turnoff. The next thing she knew, she was on this lonely stretch of road. Cars were sparse, but she took some comfort in the fact knowing that she would pass one every half hour or so. Her dashboard clock now read 2:27 a.m. She had been driving for more than 5 hours since leaving her house. At night, every 5 minutes or so, she checked her cell phone. Ever since realizing she was lost, she had checked her phone and found no bars at all. She even stopped at a gas station. Closed, of course. Just sure there should be some service around here somewhere, but nothing. Take stock of your life, Millie, she thought. You're over 30. You hate your job. You and your mother don't get along. You haven't seen or spoken to your father in just under half your life. You have no time for your friends or relationship thanks for the aforementioned job you hate. And now, here you are, trapped on a road you've never been on before, at night. And you can't even so much as call AMA, let alone check Google Maps. Smart lady you are. She briefly considered stopping and flagging down the next car that passed. She quickly realized that the futility of that plan. Any car on this road would also have no service, and so there's nothing for it. She'd have to drive until she saw a house. She'd feel bad for waking someone up, but there was no choice. She needed to find her way back to the main highway. But so far, all that she could see on either side was trees. Mile after mile of trees. No sign of anyone that had ever been here before, except that there was a road and people were obviously still driving on it. There weren't even any road signs other than the mile markers. Had she really found the middle of nowhere? She was just in the middle of this thought when her headlights illuminated something just up the road. A square wooden sign, obviously made by someone other than the government. This wasn't a gas, food, lodging sign or a mile marker or a distance to sign. This looked like the kind of signs advertising a private business was nearby. She slowed down to read it. Granny Royce's Roadhouse. Come to stay the night at Granny's. She'll take good care of you. Room, board, low prices. Next exit. Her heart sped up. She certainly wasn't interested in spending a night at Granny Royce's, but every business had a phone. At the very least, she'd have a map, or know the way back to the highway. She decided she would stop there. She almost missed the turn. Granny Royce's Roadhouse was buried at the back of a long dirt driveway, secluded amid in the trees. She was almost past the little dirt road that led back to it before realizing it was there. She skidded to a stop and turned in. The little house lay ahead. It was 2 stories and looked to have a sign about 8 to 10 rooms. Big for a home, but small for anything announcing room and board. She got closer and looked for a vacancy sign. Nothing. It wasn't that the sign wasn't lit, there was no sign. The porch light was on and the front of the building was illuminated by the light and by her headlights. No sign of any kind. She almost wondered if she had gotten the wrong place, but she was certain that she had seen no other exits between this and the sign announcing it. She paused in the driveway and took out her cell phone again. Still, no service. She did a quick search for any available wireless signals. To her complete lack of surprise, there were none. Not even any secured. There's no one here but me, she thought. At this point, she wouldn't be surprised to find the house empty as well. But the light was on, and this was supposed to be a roadhouse. Someone would be manning the front desk. She got out of the car and headed for the front porch. As she turned around to make sure the lights flashed when she hit the lock button for her fob, she thought she could see the flash of movement in the trees. Something human-shaped. She stopped and looked again. Nothing. She decided she imagined it. At the front door, she hesitated. If it was really a roadhouse, then she would be able to just go in, but what if she got the wrong house? If she tried the door and just walked in, she could find herself arrested out here in buttfuck nowhere. Cautiously, she tried the knob. It turned. She pressed gently on the door. It opened. Relief flooded through her when she saw that it was in a small, but tastefully decorated foyer that had obviously been repurposed as a admissions area. A quaint desk with an honest-to-God guest book had been placed in the far right corner, and some chairs had been set out, along with magazines on a table. She read the titles briefly. Mademoiselle, Blue Book, The New Country Life, Arts and Architecture, before turning her attention to the little desk. There wasn't a computer. That was a cute touch. It was like the house was from a past era. Perhaps old Granny Royce really didn't like modern technology. There was, however, a little bell, just like there would have been in 1929. It wasn't even the round silver kind you slap to a ring. It was a little porcelain handbell. This place was starting to out-cute her. Please, let her have a phone, and please let it use the number plan and not 50s exchanges. And she picked up the bell and gave it a shake. For a while, nothing happened. Then she saw a light come on in the back room, and the shadow of an old woman sprang up on the wall. The shadow moved toward her, and within a few seconds, she saw its owner, Granny Royce, who perhaps looked like every grandmother in every storybook ever. "Well, goodness me," she said. "My lands. Good morning, dearie. Pardon my tardiness, but it's been a while since we got guests at this hour. Can I take your name, honey?" Granny Royce was smallish, her gray hair tied in a neat bun behind her head, a dress that would have looked like it belonged to a senior citizen in the 20s, and a faded pink sweater. Melinda thought that she looked just like she would have wanted her own grandmother to look like, but her mother's mother had died when she was young, and she never met her father's mother. It almost hurt to deny this sweet little woman her business, but nevertheless, she had to get home. "Actually, I'm sorry," she began, "but the fact is, I'm lost. I'm not even sure where I am in the direction of—" "Oh, you poor thing," said Granny Royce. "You just sit down and let me fix you some tea or something. You must be cold." "Really, thank you, but I'm okay," Melinda said gently. I just need to use the phone if I could. Or if you've got a map, even that would be lovely. I really only live a couple hours from here." She trailed off, not knowing if she was even getting right about that. She easily could have driven those 5+ hours in the wrong direction entirely. "Oh dear," said the little woman. "I'm sorry, honey, but the phone lines are down. As for a map, well, I used to have one, and if I look, I still might, but it's probably quite out of date by now. The highway moved since then, I know that much." Melinda's heart sank. How could her luck get any worse? No phone, cell, or landline, and now no map. What could she do? She had to get back home. She was expected to be at work tomorrow at 8 a.m. And why were the phone lines down? The weather was coldish but clear. Were they fixing a line nearby? She told Granny Royce the name of her town, but Granny said, "Believe it or not, I've never heard of that town." "What did you say your name was?" She told her again. "No, it doesn't ring a bell, I'm sorry. But I could not say which directions it's in." "Why don't you stay the night, sweetie? I'll give you a discount for your trouble." "Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you, but I have work tomorrow and I need to get back home. I'm not even sure why I'm out tonight. The only reason I had doesn't seem to really matter anymore." Honey, I wouldn't advise trying to drive back that far tonight," Granny Royce said. "Why, it's almost 3 in the morning, and you've not had any sleep. Maybe the lines will be up in the morning and you can call your work and let them know you'll be late." That won't work either," she replied. "I'm the opener. No one will be there. No, I'm sorry. I've really got to leave. I'll head in the other direction till I find the road I was on." At that, Granny Royce's expression, already one of kind concern, seemed to shift somewhat to one of fear. She paused, looking at Melinda as though she wanted to say something else to keep her inside. Finally, she said, reluctantly, "All right, honey. Yeah, if you're sure. Just you be careful now. And don't speak to nobody until you're back on the road." The last warning seemed a little silly. After all, what was Melinda, a little girl? She thanked Granny Royce for her kindness and headed back to the car. About halfway to the car, she remembered thinking she saw something moving in the trees. Her eyes scanned both sides of the secluded little area she was in, looking for anything that appeared to be moving on its own rather than being blown by the slight wind. She saw nothing. Satisfied, she headed for the car. All 4 tires were flat. She leaned down and saw long slash marks on each tire. Someone in this little slice of green acres had slashed her tires in the time it took her to find out that she had no way of contacting anyone tonight. Kids from a local farmhouse. Gotta be, she thought grimly. Nothing else to do, so might as well go out at night and slash tires. She stopped and let the reality sink in. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. She had no choice now. She had to stay the night here until morning, when hopefully the phone lines would be up. Man, she could call someone from work to ask them to go in for her, and then AMA to get the tires dealt with. She sighed and walked back into the house. She could hear Granny Royce as she was walking back into her room. She had already turned off the lights, resigned to her fate. Melinda rang the little bell again. "Is that you, miss?" She heard Granny Royce call. Yes, it's me," she answered. "Sorry to be a bother. My name is Melinda Orton. Sorry I never mentioned it before. I guess I will take that room for the night if the offer's still good." "Oh, of course it is, dearie," said Granny Royce, re-entering the room and turning the lights back on. "Melinda. Oh, that's such a pretty name, honey. Well, let's get you situated. You put your name and arrival time in a book in there, and I'll get you a key. All the boarding rooms are on the 2nd floor, and there's only a couple left." There are others here?" This was surprising. Not a single car had been in the front lawn when she pulled in. "Oh, yes, Miss Melinda." Granny was puttering around in the adjunct room. "Mr. Norris, young Calvin, there's a few of us here." She came back out with a key in her hand. "Just out of curiosity, what made you change your mind?" She seemed to brighten as she asked the question, as though relieved that Melinda would stay after all. "Oh, it's probably just local kids getting kicks," she said, "but I found my tires slashed." Granny stopped suddenly, her face twisted with a concern and worry. She resumed as though nothing was wrong. "Nothing to be done for it, I suppose," she said with an air of sadness. "Well, not until morning, at any rate," said Melinda. "Then hopefully the lines will be up." "Oh," said Granny Royce distractedly. "Yes, hopefully." She led Melinda up to the darkened staircase into an empty, quiet hall. Or perhaps not so quiet. From one end of the hall came a muffled sound of someone crying. Whoever it was crying softly. Not with anger or fear, but with deep sadness. It sounded as if the crying was something this person was used to, but they were still unable to stop. "Who is that?" she asked, pointing in the direction the crying was coming from. "Oh, pay no mind, honey," said Granny. "That's just Mr. Norris. He's been like that for a while. Older man, you understand. Not all there." She tapped her temple. "Oh, I understand," Melinda replied, but wondered privately how an old, out-of-touch man would wind up at a roadhouse. "Has he been here long?" "A while, I'd say," answered Granny. "Don't really recall how long exactly." "How does he pay for room and board?" "I guess he doesn't drive," she said to the old woman. "Actually, it doesn't look like anyone else here has a car." Granny started at this, looking up with almost a guilty expression. "Oh, well," she said, "that kind of thing is the business of the guests. I don't ask about such things." She turned the key in the lock of the room and she had led Melinda to and opened the door. Turning on the light, she showed Melinda to a quaint little room. Melinda thought it looked like stepping into the past. She could swear this room would have looked modern in the early 50s. At the earliest, come to think of it. So could the rest of this place, she thought. No wireless service, no computer, that old bell, and those magazines, they looked new, but that thought was cut off as Granny put the key on the nightstand and started in with the instructions. "Now, the bathroom is down the hallway there. You'll be sharing it with the whole floor, so please bear that in mind if you have to go. There's a shower schedule on the door as well. First come, first serve. You just add your name to be the first available line, and that's the order the showers are in. I wouldn't worry about that if I were you, though. I'm sure you'll be first in line. I get up at 6 a.m. sharp every morning and start breakfast. But you come down whenever you're ready and I'll whip you something up. Oh, and one last thing, my dear. I would strongly advise you not to leave the house until sunup. You just never know what could happen out there in the dark." "Of course," she replied. "I would never go out there in the dark if I didn't have to." She stopped that train of thought right out of the gate. After a few moments, she was alone. Alone, without anything to wear to bed, and nothing to shower, brush her hair, or teeth with in the morning. She sat on the bed and looked out the window, which faced front. Her car still sat there, where she had left it. The only thing for miles that seemed like a part of her world. And an expensive, overlarge paperweight until I can get a hold of someone, she thought, bitterly. Despite the hominess of the room, she felt an unwillingness to rise and shut off the light. Somehow, the thought of going to sleep in this backward little room seemed unthinkable. So instead, she continued to sit there and stare out the window. A figure in black detached itself from the shadows of the trees and made its way to her car. The hell? She jumped up and ran to the window. The figure was tall and seemed to be wearing a cloak made of night. She saw its arm extend, and in its hand was a long, jagged dagger. It dragged the dagger across the side of her car, leaving a long gash, marking the paint and metal. "Hey!" she shouted. The figure kept dragging the dagger. She reached for the window and to open it. It wouldn't budge. She looked for a lock, but couldn't see one. "Hey!" she yelled again. This time, the figure raises its head, and she could see the glint of two eyes under the hood. The figure raised the dagger slowly, determinedly. It pointed it straight at her face. She leapt away from the window and ran for the door. A noise on the other side stopped her. Footsteps. Dragging, shambling footsteps. And crying. The sound of a person for whom deep, longing sadness is the way of life. "Mr. Norse." She waited. Somehow, she just felt that she could let the old man pass before she opened the door. Before he got very far, however, she heard other footsteps. These, much quicker and lighter, run up the stairs and stop near the door of her room. "Stop it," hissed Granny Royce. "Go back in your room right now. You know better. She can't see you yet. Hopefully, she won't have to see you at all. Now you go back in there. You've got no business being out at this hour anyway." What on earth? How could that sweet old woman talk to another human like that, let alone an old man with a foggy mind? She almost opened the door right then, but somehow her hand stopped, and waited until the shuffling, crying old man had made his way back down the hallway. She heard his door open. She opened her own door just in time to see his foot shod in a well-worn house shoe. slide into his room, the door closed softly after him. That poor man, she thought. But now she was determined to find out what was going on. The punk outside in the Halloween costume slashing up her car, followed by Granny yelling at an old man, made her begin to understand that not all was well here. She went back down to the front desk area, which was completely unlit except for the moonlight and the porch light coming through the window. There was, however, a light on near the back room that Granny Royce had emerged from before. Melinda paused to take a look outside the front window. The maniac with the dagger was nowhere to be seen for the moment, but she was now determined that it was he that she had seen moving through the trees. He could have killed me. And she strode in the direction of the light, saying that it was the light through the kitchen. She kept going, expecting to find Granny Roy still puttering about with whatever an old innkeeper did with herself during the early hours of the morning. Instead, she found Granny sitting with a young man of about 20. He had dark hair and a scruff of stubble and was wearing a dark brown corduroy shirt with khakis, along with a pork pie hat. He looked like he was ready to go sell newspapers on a street corner in the 1930s. He was quietly sipping tea while Granny was admonishing him from the other end of the table. "Now, that was a horrible thing to say," she said. "When I was your age, young men minded their manners." "That's a laugh, talking about my age," muttered the young man with a sneer. "Just how old are you? Do you even remember?" "Calvin Davison, you are in trouble, young man," she hissed back. Neither had noticed Melinda yet. "One of these days, you're going to say something you'll regret." "Aw, come on, Granny. What could I possibly say that will make things worse than they already are?" demanded Calvin. "I mean, look at old Mr. Norris up there. Both of us are, hello, miss. I didn't know we had anyone else here." He had just seen Melinda. Hi," she said. She had the feeling that she had walked into an argument the two of them have had many times, and that did not concern her. Her fear and anger were forgotten at the moment. Calvin had been talking to Granny like a sullen kid, but something about what they were saying seemed wrong. "Can I help you, Melinda?" asked Granny Royce. "Is there something wrong with your room?" That brought her back. "No," she said. "The room is fine, but nothing else is. I mean, what on earth do you even have a roadhouse out here where it seems like no one ever stops? Why are most of the rooms full, even though mine is the only car out there? Why did I hear you talking to Mr. Norris like he was a dog, and why would you want to make sure I didn't see him?" She got no further before Calvin cut her off. "Ah, good Lord. She's not even been here a night and she can see it. Why did you even let her in, Granny? Why don't you just bolt the door? Hell, if I could go take down that sign, don't you think I would have by now? Lord, have a duck." "There's something you don't hear many young men say," thought Melinda. She decided to ignore Calvin for the moment otherwise. And besides that, there's someone out there. He's a freak who slashed my tires, and he's been out here messing up my car ever since then. And you can't even call the police? Are you going to tell me that you've never had vandals out here before?" There was a long pause in the room. Neither Granny nor Calvin seemed willing to break it. Calvin scratched at his neck for the first time. Melinda noticed a red slash at his throat, half hidden by his collar. It looked like either a very fresh scar or a slightly healed wound. "Listen, miss. I don't know your name," he finally said. "Melinda," she told him. "Melinda," he repeated. "Melinda, I think you should sit down. I have to tell you something that you may find troubling." Melinda did not like how he said that. She also didn't like the way his tone had switched from a sullen child to a serious adult. He looked several years her junior, but he was talking to her like he was her uncle or her boss. He swallowed a sip of tea and sighed. and then looked her straight in the face and said, "The reason I don't have a car out there is that when I got here, no one my age, no one in my line of work, would have owned a car. It would have seemed like an impossible dream." What are you talking about?" she asked, hesitantly. "I worked in a textile mill," he said. "The mill was shut down by the time I got here. Most businesses were, so I struck out on my own, a drifter looking for what work he could find, and I stopped here. Forever. Businesses were shut down." "I don't understand," said Melinda. "We're having a rough time of it right now, but businesses are mostly staying open." "Not then they weren't," said Calvin, sadly. "I arrived here in, 1929. Melinda blinked. Something had exploded behind her eyes. "This place was new then," said Granny. "My man and I had just opened it, and young Mr. Calvin was a sweet young lad of 16. I offered to take him on as a hired help over my husband's objections. Well, my husband was a well-meaning man, but he knew how to pinch a penny. 'Twas a year after I took Calvin on that Mr. Royce died. Calvin and I have been living here ever since, and every few years or so someone joins us." "Yep," Calvin broke in. "Miss Tilly was the first. She was a woman of ill repute who ran here, pregnant, and scared that the man who run her trade up in New York was going to find her and kill her. She and that baby." He broke off, now seeming on the point of tears. "And then," said Granny, "there was Mr. Standish. He was a traveling minister. He doesn't travel anymore." "Mr. Norris got here in 69, said Calvin. "His story is probably the worst. He was a bank robber, you see. Carried a pistol, and he didn't like learning how long we'd all been here. He paused, stood, and walked out to the kitchen window. He tried to leave on his own, you see. He ain't the first to try it. That was me, actually. I warned him not to try, but he wouldn't listen. But when he got outside, he met him." "Calvin," hissed Granny, "we don't talk about this." She's got to know," said Calvin. "There's no point in her finding out slowly." "There's still a chance for her," said Granny in a stage whisper. "All she has to do is wait until morning." "She's not going to wait until morning," said Calvin with some remorse in his words. "No one ever waits until morning. The fact that she came down here is proof enough of that, but besides, what good would that have really done her? Her car is useless. We have no phones here. There was no phone when this place went up, and there won't never be a phone here. You know that." "Okay, everyone, stop," Melinda shouted. "That's enough. Now, you can't keep me a prisoner here, and I have no intention of staying any longer. Only that knife-wielding maniac out there is keeping me from running up the road this minute. Now, I need to know what's really going on here, and I need to know it now." "We've been telling you," Calvin said. "Granny may not want you to know everything, but you need to, because you won't be leaving." "Oh, we're not trying to keep you prisoner. I don't even care if you run out that door right now, but you'll never leave this house again afterward." "Like hell I won't," yelled Melinda. "Listen, child," said Granny, rising from her spot at the table. "Listen, please. None of us mean you any harm, my dear. Not even Mr. Norris. There's scant he can do any more, and he knows it. That's why he's been up there crying all the time, but we're stuck here. All of us. I hoped there was a chance for you to run for it in the morning, but Calvin's right. There's no guarantee you'd be safe in the morning anyhow. What the hell is wrong with this place? Choked out Melinda. She was beginning to break down. She could feel tears welling in her eyes. It was about a month after Mr. Royce died, said Calvin. It's when he came. He was wearing that long black robe and carrying that ridiculous dagger. I saw him when I was trimming the hedges in the back. I told him he needed to get out of here because I didn't like his look. He moved so fast. I never saw it coming. And he got me. From here. Calvin touched his neck. To here. He touched his lower abdomen on the opposite side of his neck slash. He began to undo his shirt. Melinda almost vomited. Under his shirt was a long, ugly slash that went deep and was still seeping blood. She could see bone, muscle, and intestines wriggling around within that mangled ruin. I died that night, said Calvin. But then I didn't. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged into the house by Granny, and when I woke up, I nearly scared her to death. She was sure that I was gone. The thing is, I was. But I was awake. I could talk, walk, do anything I could while alive, except take any enjoyment or nourishment from food or drink anymore. I still drink that tea because it keeps my skin from turning ash gray. I learned about that 50 years ago. He didn't go away though. Granny broke in. I went out to deal with him, carrying my axe. He took my axe and buried it in my back. I won't show you the wound, honey. Calvin shouldn't have shown you his either, but no one should ever see it. But that's how he works, Melinda, continued Calvin. He's got that knife, but if you try to use a weapon on him, he just moves like he does and he takes it from you. You never stand a chance. He'll use whatever weapon you try to take him down with to end you. Mr. Norris, he learned that the hard way. This is not happening. Melinda was ready to break down. She had to hold it together. She had to get out of there somehow. Nothing about this was right. Nothing about it could be real. It was all a dream. Too much didn't make sense. Her father calling her out of the blue. Her leaving to go to him without a second thought. Getting lost so quickly and so irreversibly. No cell phone service anywhere on this road. This place. Everything about it. She was dreaming. That had to be it. But if so, she was going to survive this dream. She turned and ran for the stairs. Her purse was still in her room, but she was going to grab it and go. She had had enough. Protesting voices began babbling behind her. She cared not one whit. Mr. Norris was waiting at the top of the stairs. Contrary to Granny Royce's description of him, he was not old at all. He was no more than about 40. But she saw instantly what she meant by not all there. The top half of Mr. Norris's head looked normal, like a reasonably attractive man with dark hair peppered with gray here and there. His eyes, a clear green, were moist with fresh tears. The lower half of his face was a ruin of bone fragments, shredded muscle, and blood. So much blood. His left side was similarly destroyed. His arm hung on a few hanging strands of muscle. His hip was just as much of a mess of bone and blood as his face was. He kept his one good hand on the banister as he shuffled toward her. Behind him stood a young woman in a bra and a pair of panties. Her stomach was cut open, and looking out of the wound with bright, intelligent eyes was the mangled remains of a baby. Melinda turned and bolted for the front door. Her hand had just closed around the knob when Calvin rushed up to her, placing his freezing cold hand over hers. "They're not going to hurt you," he said quickly. "But he will. If you step out that door for so much as a moment, he will kill you. And it will hurt. And it will go on hurting forever. After a while, you learn to function with the pain, but it never goes away." Sobbing, she asked the question she had been afraid to ask since coming here. "Who is he?" "We don't know," said Granny, from behind Calvin. "He just came here, and he won't go away. He likes to watch us and do things to incite us to come out again. As soon as someone does, he hurts them more. But no matter how many times he kills us, we don't die. Believe me when I say, we all wish we could." Melinda had enough of this. She pushed Calvin away and threw open the door. He was standing on the porch. The knife was held in front of him, just at face level. Melinda ran into him at a rush, the knife puncturing her right eye, and its tip sliding on through, out the other side. She had just managed to see the grinning, pure white face of her killer before everything went black. A few hours later, the house erupted with screams from upstairs as Melinda awoke to a world of pain, the like which she'd never known. It was everything I wanted. A charming two-story fixer-upper nestled away on a dirt road, hidden by overgrown foliage. The paint had faded away in places, exposing the wood, and the porch steps sagged a bit, for sure. But I knew it was the one, the very first time we'd come to see it. I'd been drawn to it, almost magnetically. Cedric had been skeptical. He couldn't see the hidden gem beneath the layer of dust and outdated appliances the way I could. "Come on, Kate. This place?" He'd been incredulous. "It looks like a ton of work," and he wasn't wrong. But it was a challenge I was up for. Eventually, he caved in to my unwavering insistence. The feeling in my bones wouldn't let me give it up. It had to be this one. The closing went as smooth as it could be, and a couple weeks later it was ours. But Cedric had promised to stay working on a project that would take about a month to finish before transferring to our new town, roughly 3 hours away. I couldn't wait that long. No, I was way too eager to get there and start the process of making our new house into our home. As a freelance graphic artist, I could work from anywhere. Plus, it would give me a whole month to get the house spruced up and convince Cedric we'd made the perfect choice. After wearing him down again, he begrudgingly agreed that it might be good for me to go ahead of him and get started. So there I was, looking at a maze of boxes with no idea where to start. In my haste, I had neglected to label them properly. Go figure, that was typical of me. So I began opening them at random and placing them in the appropriate room. Fortunately, we didn't have many to choose from. Just the bedrooms and bathroom upstairs, and then the kitchen, the dining room, and my office downstairs. The cellar too, I suppose, though I hoped I'd never have a reason to go down there. With the sun already beginning to set and the long drive to get there, my energy was already waning, but I figured I might not get very far along that first day. I settled on picking out one last box before putting my feet up for the evening. It was full of sheets and towels for the guest room. I was glad I'd chosen a fairly light load to carry up the stairs. The master bedroom was at the top of the steps and the guest room was at the end of the hall, with a bathroom in between. I groped around for the light switch, still unfamiliar with where it was located on the wall. It was pretty difficult to do with, my hands full, so I gave up and squinted down the hall to where the last rays of sunlight shone faintly through the guest window. I fumbled my way to the closest door and slid it open, placing the box on the shelf and turning to leave, when something grabbed me. "Oh," I cried out, surprised by the sudden pain between my toes. Then I'd been caught by a nail protruding out of the floorboards. I found the pull switch for a hanging bulb and knelt down to examine my injured foot. Sure enough, there was already a dark red spot staining my sock. My fault for taking my shoes off, I supposed. I made a mental note to go around with a hammer and find any of the other loose nails. I checked the floorboard it had come from and noticed that it didn't even set flush with the rest. A peculiar notion occurred to me, and it looked like there was almost enough space to fit my fingers under the corner. And it was that magnetic feeling again before I stopped to think about why I was doing it. I had pried the panel away. For some reason, I wasn't really surprised to find that there was something in there. A dust-covered box, small and slim, just the right size to fit through the gap between the boards. I reached in and pulled it out, still surprised by my own intuition. I could see that there was something written on it in black crayon, and after wiping the dust away, I was able to read it. And what could only be a child's attempt at writing in elegant cursive, a single word was scrawled, "Prudence." Of course, this must have been her room, and she had hidden a treasure of some sort in the floor. Overtaken with curiosity, I opened it to find dozens of folded pieces of paper filling the box to the brim. The first one I examined depicted typical childish scenes: a house, a girl, presumably her, and the sun. Flowers, a cat, a girl on the next one, a man, a woman, a girl, and so it went. There was nothing particularly interesting or unique about these drawings. I could only wonder why they had been hidden away. They were just messy scribblings of ordinary things. That is, until I got to the last one. Unlike the rest, which had been brightly colored and cheery, this one had only been made using a black crayon. It was of a woman. The immediate impression she gave me was that of a witch. Her hair stuck out widely, her eyes large black ovals. Her face was stretched into an unkind smile. Goosebumps erupted all over my skin, and I quickly folded it back up so I wouldn't have to see those awful eyes staring into mine. The sudden ringing of my phone made me jump. Cedric was calling. "Hey," I answered, trying not to let my voice tremble. "Hey, how's it going up there? The movers, did they break anything?" "I haven't found anything so far. They got all the furniture landed, but I told them to just throw the boxes in the living room, and I'm seriously regretting it." I forced a chuckle. He started to say something else, but our connection cut in and out. Hold on, I'm losing you." He kept talking, likely unable to hear me. I stuffed the drawings back into the box and debating on what to do with it before deciding to carry it out with me. I searched for another spot where the reception was better, still listening to Cedric's voice cut in and out. "Hey, can you hear me?" I asked. Between the short bursts of words that I could make out, there was a sharp static. No. I listened closer, straining my ears. No, it wasn't static. It was breathing. Short, raspy breaths. I nearly dropped the phone in surprise. Did I lose you, Kate?" Cedric's voice was once again coming in clear. The ragged breathing was gone. No. I'm here." I didn't know what to do with Prudence's treasure box. It seemed like it was meant to be found, but a part of me wanted to put it back in the floor and never think about it again. There was no other way I was going to tell Cedric about it. Still hadn't decided on what to do with it, so I left it on the counter for the time being. I didn't want to admit to myself at that time, but I was afraid of going back upstairs, so I opted to crash on the couch for the evening. And it's hard to sleep in a new place. My dreams were very active but vague. I awoke often with fragments of them just out of reach. I tossed and turned, disoriented every time I opened my eyes. When the early morning hours finally arrived, the sun shone in directly on my face, hot and abrasive. I realized there was no point in trying to get some more sleep with it blaring down on me at full force. Even with the lack of rest, I was still glad to see the place in daylight once again. The eerie feeling I had the night before vanished in the wake of the new day's optimism. After some coffee, I got to work, moving boxes around until the living room was nearly empty. The next step was actually unpacking them, and naturally, I started in the master bedroom. Between folding clothes and putting them in our dressers, I could hear the occasional squeaking. It was subtle at first, easy for me to ignore, but over time it grew louder, finally becoming a jarring whine. I glanced up, looking down the hallway at first at the guest room, just in time to see the door shut. I would be lying if I said I wasn't terrified for a moment, but the rational part of my brain kicked back in pretty quickly. It's an old house, probably just a draft, right? I wanted to shrug it off and move on, but I couldn't. Something about that door being closed got under my skin. For some reason, I felt like it had to stay open. I made my way across the hall. My hand shook slightly as I turned the antique knob. I let it swing back open, reassured to find nothing there. It was almost laughable. What had I expected to see? It was preposterous to be a grown woman afraid of her own home. I went back to the master bedroom, shaking my head at myself, so silly, so childish to think that. A thunderous bang made me flinch. My breath caught as I looked across the hall and saw that the door was shut again. No, calm down. Just a draft. Really, just really a draft. Just a drafty draft. Maybe the door could stay closed? Oh, what was the harm in that? I don't remember dozing off, but when I awoke, it was dark. Where was I? I tried to make out my surroundings, reaching forward in the dark as my feet found the floor. A sliver of light shone in from under the door. Which door? And I gripped the handle. Light flooded in from the room as I opened it. I was in the master, and across the hall the guest room light was on and the door was wide open. Knots formed in my stomach. I knew I hadn't opened it, and I was certain I hadn't left the light on. The floor felt cold under my bare feet. Too cold, almost like ice. I could see my breath swirling in front of me. When I got to the room, I realized it was wrong. Instead of wood-paneled walls, a floral wallpaper decorated the room. The furniture wasn't right either. The small bed, the vanity, the desk, and the chair. None of it should have been there, but for some reason it all felt so familiar. The door slammed shut behind me. Panicked, I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door, still desperately trying to turn the handle. No, let me out. Let me out of here, please. Please let me out, I shrieked. My voice high-pitched and foreign-sounding. Never before had I felt panic like this. Just when I thought my heart couldn't take any more, the closet door began to slide open. The scream died in my throat and I collapsed to the floor. There was something emerging from the darkness. I could faintly see their silhouette. Then the sun was in my face once more. I was on the living room carpet from falling from the couch. The scream I had been trying to release in my dream came out as a hoarse coughing fit. It took me a while to catch my breath, but my first thought was to call Cedric. I found my phone on the counter next to Prudence's box, and I shuddered. I'd forgotten to put it on the charger, so it was completely dead when I picked it up. But maybe that was for the best. What was I going to do? Call Cedric and tell him I found some kid's drawings? And that a draft in the house was enough to give me nightmares? No. Now, I could practically hear the condescending tone he'd use with me, the blistering sarcasm. I didn't need that. I just needed to get a grip. I stared down at the treasure box, almost accusingly. That's it. You're going back, I told it, carrying it up the steps. The door at the end of the hall was shut. Nothing to worry about. It was just a draft. That was all. The wood paneling was still intact. The only object in the room was the yet-to-be-made guest bed, but the closet door was open. Had I closed it the other day? No, probably not. There's no need to be alarmed. Feeling foolish, I spoke aloud as I pulled the loose floorboard up. Hey, Prudence? I'm putting your pictures back. I just wanted to look at them. They're really nice, okay? And I put them back. See? I don't know why I did it, but it made me feel better. I pushed the board down and stumped it back into place. Well, that's that, I declared. As I walked back down the steps, the draft blew the door shut. The next few days passed uneventfully. I had decided that until Cedric arrived, I would keep sleeping on the couch. It was pretty cozy, I reasoned, and it had nothing to do with being creeped out. I was being productive. I'd gotten the kitchen and the bedroom up to snuff and set my office up downstairs. It was supposed to rain for a couple of days, but when the sun came back out, I planned to spend some time trimming back the garden and the hedges. Make it look like someone actually lived here. In the meantime, I decided to reach out to a few clients who I promised designs for once I settled in, and one of them got back to me right away, so I had my first commission in my new place. I'd been working for a few hours straight, and my eyes needed a break from the screen. Outside, the rain had died down into a gray mist, and I decided to take a walk through the untamed yard that I had yet to spend so much time in. There was a heavily wooded area outside the iron gate surrounding the garden that we owned about 3 acres of. It was a maze of low-hanging branches and thorn bushes, so I didn't end up getting very far. I turned back to survey the garden and brainstorm ideas for what to plant next spring. While I was opening the gate, I happened to glance up at the window above me, the master bedroom. Movement had caught my eye. There was nothing there, of course, but from inside I heard a door slam shut. I got back to my project. I didn't bother investigating when I got back inside. I knew that the guest room door had been closed for days. It would be closed when I saw it next. And this happened so often it became mundane. My schedule for the next week was simple. Work on the house until noon, work on graphic projects until I got tired. All the while, Prudence's door would echo through the house every time it closed. I learned to live with it, tune it out. Kids will be kids, I suppose. Our routine was woven into my daily life so seamlessly, so naturally, that it didn't really register. There she was, playing out in the garden while I worked inside, her braided hair falling behind her as she laughed and frolicked. There she was, eagerly awaiting her breakfast and swinging her feet on the kitchen stool. There she was, dressing her dolls in the living room while I was busy in my office. I was so proud of her. She'd really made this move easy on me. I came into my office to find her doodling away in the living room one evening. "What you working on, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling down beside her. She kept her head down, still working away. Is that me? Wow, look at that. Thank you so much, darling, I exclaimed. You make me so proud. My words faltered as she looked up. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking behind me, her face shrouded in absolute dread. Oh no. She found us, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Who did? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Mother. I turned behind me to see a woman towering over us. Her face was twisted with rage. Her eyes bulged from behind a dark mane of unkempt hair. "What is this? What is this? This filth?" she bellowed, snatching the drawing from Prudence before I could react. She held it in front of us like she was brandishing a knife. A picture of my smiling face. The words scrawled across the top read, "I love you, Mama." And then I remembered. Prudence. Prudence wasn't my child, was she? My thoughts were interrupted by the woman slapping Prudence across the face with the back of her knuckles. Prudence's head snapped back and the crayon in her hand went flying across the room. She let out a terrible gut-wrenching sob and covered the welt that had already started to form on her face. The woman tore the drawing to shreds and swore at her. "You wretched little girl. Have you no respect for your mother?" she hissed, grabbing Prudence by the hair and pulling her up. Regaining my senses, I leapt to my feet. "Let go of her. Let her go," I demanded, chasing after them. Prudence's mother paused. With her back still to me, her head twisted around to face me, her spine making sickening popping sounds as the bones rearranged. Her eyes were now wide, black voids. Her mucus-tinged lips spread apart to reveal rows of jagged teeth before she unleashed a guttural bellow that sent me sprawling to the floor. She leered down at me, relishing my terror. Then, with a wet, squelching sound, her head spun back around as she dragged Prudence back up the stairs. Her pained sobs echoing down the hallway until her door was slammed shut, and a deafening silence fell over the house. I was shivering so hard that I couldn't pick myself up off the floor. This was a dream. This had to be. It was the only way to explain what was happening. I was asleep, and I'd never had a child named Prudence. I was asleep, and the demon woman was just a nightmare. I was asleep, and if I could wake myself up, everything would be fine. I was asleep. I was on the floor, and the sun was blinding. My pulse throbbed inside my skull. My throat felt tight, and my eyes were dried and crusted, but I was awake, and the nightmare was over. I was awake, and everything was going to be okay. I gingerly pressed myself up, my muscles tight and uncomfortable from sleeping on the floor. I climbed to the couch and simply sat for a while, my head in my hands. I don't think there's a word for the feeling I had that morning. I was grieving the loss of a daughter that didn't exist, questioning my sanity and unable to get that demonic image of her mother's head spinning around out of my mind. Before long, I was sobbing, incapable of stopping myself from sinking into the cushions. It must have been an hour before I finally ran out of breath and tears. For the first time, I was ready to admit to myself that something was very wrong. Something was happening to me, something I couldn't understand. And I needed help. I needed Cedric. I needed to hear his voice. As if on cue, my phone began to ring from inside my office. Cedric. I had only taken a couple steps when something hard crunched under the same foot the nail had punctured. Ah! I winced, looking to see what it was. A black crayon rolled up from under my toes, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't possible. No, it couldn't be. How did you get here? How? I screamed at it. I picked it up, clenching it tightly as my phone went off again and again. That was it. I was losing it. I needed to get out. I needed to call Cedric. I picked the phone up off my desk, barely able to speak over the panic that had risen in my throat. Cedric? Hey, Katie. How's everything going? He replied, mistaking my frantic tone for enthusiasm. Cedric, I don't know what to do. Something's really wrong here. Whoa. Hey, slow down a minute. Take a breath. Are you alright? Is Prudence alright? I felt like I had been plunged into ice water. What did you just say? I asked if you and Prudence are alright. Kate, you're scaring me. What's going on? I let the phone drop to the floor. I could still hear his voice calling out to me as I backed away from it. It couldn't be. No, it wasn't real. None of it was real. No, I was certain of it. How many times had we discussed having children? We'd even fought over it at times, but the outcome had always been the same. We simply wasn't ready. We was too busy with our careers, our apartment was too small, money was tight. We'd always had a reason. But her crayon, it was in my hand, and the upstairs door slammed shut. No, I'm done with this, I screeched. My fear shifting to anger as I ascended the creaking steps 2 at a time. I rushed down the hallway toward the guest room and flung the door open. Floral wallpaper greeted me. The girl sitting at the desk looked at me with a confused look on her face. Prudence, I gasped, tears streaming down my face. It couldn't be. Mama, what's wrong? Are you mad at me? I covered my face in my hands, doing my best to stifle my sobs. No, dear. No, I'm not mad. I don't understand. I don't understand, I cried. She rose from her seat, hugging my thigh tightly. I didn't mean to be bad, Mama. I'm sorry. I don't like making you upset. I could feel myself losing balance. The room tilted viciously as I stumbled to her bed. You don't make me upset. I just don't understand. What is happening? It's because I've been bad, Mama. It's all my fault, she insisted. Don't say that. I'm sorry, Mama. I shouldn't have tricked you. My head snapped up. Trick me? She looked down at the floor, ashamed, refusing to look me in the eye. I know you're not my mama, but I wish you were. My mother is scary, she finally said, walking over to her desk and holding up a drawing made with black crayon. The witch woman stared back at me without her evil oval eyes. I looked down at the crayon I was still holding and handed it to Prudence. I thought if I could hide with you, she wouldn't be able to find me, she murmured. Finishing her mother's face, she folded it into quarters and placed it into the treasure box. A strange moment of clarity pulled me from the fog that had surrounded me ever since I'd been in this house. Does your mother like to hide things too? I asked her. Her eyes grew wide and she bobbed her head. What kind of things, Prudence? She placed her finger on her lips and shushed me. She'll hear you, she hissed, looking out into the hall. I followed her stare. Down the hall, the master door was shut. Listen to me, Prudence. I know that you want to hide from her and you want me to stay with you, right? But to do that, I need your help. Do you understand? She was still looking down the hall. The door was now open. Prudence? She shook her head, her fingers still held to her lips. I peered down the hall again. I don't see her, I whispered. It's okay. My words were cut off as I was seized by the throat and lifted off my feet. Black Hose stared into my frantic eyes, her ice-cold grip squeezing the life out of me. She is not your child, she screamed, hurling me into the hall. My head slammed off the floor. I could feel a warm substance trickling behind my ear as I struggled to sit up. Prudence's door was shut. From inside I could hear her wailing and begging. I threw myself against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle spun uselessly in my hands. Her screams grew louder, and her mother unleashed a vile scream of obscenities followed by heavy thuds. No, Prudence. Then the awful sounds coming from inside the room ceased, and the door creaked open. Wood paneling, an unmade guest bed. A rage I had never felt before came over me. You can't have her. You don't deserve her, you bitch, I cried, animalistic fury making my voice unrecognizable. Later that day, I was marching back up the stairs with a hammer in hand, nauseous and sweaty. I pried the paneling away, revealing the hideous wallpaper I'd grown fond of. This was her room. This was her room. This was... As I tore the paneling away in a corner of the room where her desk used to be, I was met with a message. A floral print beneath had scrawled over with black crayon, over and over, overlapping, and in various sizes, the same words repeated. Help me. Help me. Help me. Cedric had called a few times. My clients had sent me messages asking when my drafts would be done. I didn't answer them. Prudence was all that mattered. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, waiting for the door to slam shut. I had to be there when it did. Somehow I knew. I had learned to never doubt the magnetic feeling. As comfortable as that mattress was, I couldn't risk sleep, even though my body desperately needed it. It made me too vulnerable. It made it hard to remember what was real. So I waited, listening and watching. I knew she was lurking somewhere. At any time, I felt myself close to succumbing to fatigue. I opened Prudence's treasure box to remind myself who I was fighting for and what was at stake. That sweet little girl and the life she longed for under the floorboards. That happy, smiling, loving family. I was going to save her. I was going to give her the life she deserved. Her newest drawing had been resting on top of the pile when I took the box out of the floor. I knew it was a message, a way to help her. It depicted me holding a key, and that was all. I'd spent the day scouring the house for it, with no luck. I could only imagine what it went to, perhaps a way for me to get to her somehow. I tried in vain to get her room to appear again, but no matter how many times I opened and closed the door, the guest room remained, with its newly ravaged decor. And so I kept my eyes down the hall, waiting for the master door to open, armed only with the black crayon Prudence had left inside the treasure box. One glance at the moon outside the window was all it took. When I looked back, the door was open and my breath billowed in front of my face. Oh, Caitlin, you really are a stupid girl, aren't you? My mother stood in the doorway, her face scrunched up in a disgust the way it usually was when she spoke to me. Mom? She strode toward me, her arms crossed tight. You'll have to smarten up, girl, or no man will ever want to be with you, she sneered, leaning closer to me. Her skin was too pale. Her smile was too wide. You're not her. You're not, I said, regaining my senses and backing away. She let out a growl, and the features of her face slipped off like melting wax. Black, lifeless eyes stared back at me. Prudence's mother had looked less and less human every time I'd seen her, but now she was practically a corpse. Her flesh oozed a thick green substance onto the floor. Her limbs were emaciated and elongated, her posture bent and crooked. She backed me into a corner with her rows of razor-sharp teeth on full display. We were nearly eye to eye. I could see it, dangling around her neck. The key. You should have never tried to take it from me, she roared. Flecks of blood splattered in my face. She is mine, and she will always be here with me. You're pathetic, I laughed in her face. You're getting weaker, you know that. All you ever had was fear, and you're nothing without it. She hissed in reply, grappling me by the hair. At the same time, I reached for the key and kicked my feet into her as hard as I could. I fell to the ground with a chunk of her hair missing and the key in my palm. Prudence's mother stumbled back, a look of shock on her demonic face. She dropped on all fours, racing towards me like a spider. You're weak, I screamed, kicking her in the face. The bones in her neck bent, protruding from her skin. A stream of black liquid leaked from her empty eye sockets, and I aimed another kick before scrambling to my feet. I had the key in one hand, and a small hand in the other. Prudence looked up at me in terror. The thing on the floor was wheezing and worthing, trying to reach for us, getting smaller and more shriveled by the minute. Don't be afraid. She can't hurt you, okay, Prudence? I assured her, Now, we have to go. I need you to show me what this key goes to. She took me down the hall, away from the shrieking, and down the stairs. In the living room, she paused, looking up at me. Her face had an expression on it I couldn't quite place. Mama? What is it, Prudence? I'm sorry I didn't tell you. About what? She was already walking toward the cellar door, the only place in the house I still hadn't been to. When we'd first come to see it, I'd stuck my head inside, but I'd never gone down. Prudence pushed the door open and beckoned for me to follow her on the rickety steps. I grabbed the flashlight from the mantel and made the descent, illuminating cobwebs and the dirt floor at the bottom. I waved the light around, scanning the empty cellar. There didn't seem to be anything that a key would open. What are we looking for? I finally asked. Prudence stomped a foot where she was standing and something solid met her heel. I lowered myself for a closer look, brushing the layers of dirt away. It was wooden, and it was solid. My initial scan of the cellar had revealed a shovel resting in the corner, and I quickly grabbed it. What is it? What's under here? Prudence only shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. I dug as fast as I could, letting the rough wood on the shovel's handle tear my palms open in my haste. All the while, Prudence stood eerily still, watching the chest be uncovered gradually. Finally, it was loose enough for me to get the shovel's blade under the corner and pry it up from the earth. It was not nearly as heavy as I expected it to be, and I fell back from the unneeded effort I'd put into pulling it up. I brushed the dirt from the lock and held the key to it, almost reluctant to discover what her mother had kept hidden. That's okay, Mama. Open it, Prudence said, placing a hand over mine and smiling sweetly. I braced myself and turned the key. It clicked open, and I raised the lid slowly, as if something might jump out at me. I shined the flashlight inside, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a pile of bones. Bones that had once made up a tiny skeleton. The skeleton of a girl who stood before me. I clapped a hand to my mouth, tears falling before I could stop myself. Oh, Prudence. Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I wanted to get you out of here. I'm so sorry, I sobbed. She placed her little hand on my shoulder and gave me a reassuring smile. You still can, she whispered. I didn't take much out of the house. I took the chest out first, and then I went back in to get Prudence's treasure box and my phone so that I could call Cedric and tell him what I'd done. There were a lot of things in that house I left behind, but I don't regret it, because as the flames spread and I watched them cover the house from the garden, I was staring at the window upstairs. Those soulless black eyes looking back knew they were doomed. The thing that used to be human knew there would no longer be a place for it to hide once the fire had reduced the structure to ash. It would have no one left to torment. It would have no one left to fear it. And it will be utterly and miserably alone for the rest of its pseudo-existence. Every time it rains, though only at night, a spiraling wooden staircase appears in my room, and the sound of the rainfall against the roof is usually enough to rouse me from my sleep, the drumming against the glass loud and clear. The streetlight beyond the window casts a wash of shimmering orange light into my room through the gap in the curtains, and as this light falls upon the staircase, extending up and through the ceiling into a world of shadow. The first time it happened, I just assumed that I was dreaming, and so I paid it no mind. I simply rolled over and returned to sleep, amused. The sun rose the next morning and cast the night away, and with it, the stairs, and I promptly forgot all about them. And that is, until a few nights later when they appeared again. Same spots as before, standing silently. I remember staring at it from my bed, trying to comprehend, trying to work out if what I was seeing was actually real. I glanced around the room and realized that the door to my bedroom had vanished, replaced entirely with a blank wall, and I ended up just watching the staircase, wide-eyed and terrified, unsure how to proceed and afraid that something might come down them. I think in the end I just screwed my eyes shut tight and forced myself to go back to sleep. This is what I did the third and fourth times too. I began to fear rain at night because I knew what it meant. I started obsessing over weather reports. It was not until the staircase's sixth appearance that I found the courage to finally get out of bed and examine it a little closer. I know there are some people here who would have raced up that thing on day one, but I'm sorry. I'm just not one of them. I'm not the type of person who just acts. I have to think things through. Everything. I have to think everything through. I have to have all possible outcomes laid out in my head before I can commit to something. That's no matter how insignificant. I get a little confidence boost when I'm able to follow one of my pre-prepared routes all the way to the end, but it's exhausting. And sometimes, quite often, in fact, something will happen that I hadn't prepared for. A conversation won't go the way I expected. A phone call fails to follow any of the possible paths that I had pre-planned. Or a social venture lands less than desirable, and I panic. I am reminded that life is chaotic and unfair, and I retreat back into myself a little further. I put things off because of this crippling self-imposed setback. A pair of dumbbells sit unused and gathering dust in the corner of my room. My college assignments pile up. The university starts automatically knocking marks off your maximum potential grade for every day you fall behind your assignment in the past deadline. But for some reason, this still just isn't enough to motivate me. I hate myself, and yet I cannot find the will to work as hard as I would like. I stepped a little closer to the staircase. I tapped the edge of its rough and crooked carved banister with a finger as the rain washed down the window. Hard, cold, dark wood. I looked up. The staircase went round and disappeared up through a hole in my ceiling into a world of shadow. I imagined a terrible, twisted creature clambering down suddenly on all fours, eyes wide and jaw distended, screeching through the dark, and I saw myself trapped in a room with no door and no way out. Heart pounding, I returned hastily into my bed and pleaded for the night's swift passing and the rise of the sun. And sure enough, after a long and torturous night, it rose. My life continued to stagnate. The stairs always became less of a threat in my mind during the day, and I knew I needed to visit the campus library to complete my work. But I could not summon the energy to do so. A few of my friends invited me out one evening, but I declined that too. I knew the topic of conversation would inevitably flow into our studies and our courses and things that we'd been up to, and I couldn't stomach another night of feeling inadequate and pathetic. So I made up some excuse and ignored all the subsequent messages. I was angry, and I went to bed that night, angry at myself and angry at the world. And now I find myself being awakened once again by the beat of the rain on the roof. I grit my teeth in frustration and roll onto my side, and sure enough, there they are. The stairs are there. And you know what? This time, I decide I'm going up. I've started keeping a baseball bat by the side of my bed, and I grab it now as I clench my jaw and head on over to the stairs. I take a deep breath. I squeeze the bat tight, and I bring my foot onto the first step. The wood is cold, but I feel at once a rush of warm air from up above. I lick my teeth and continue my ascent. And this is the night. This is the night where I find out what lies at the top, for better or for worse. I try to plan and play out a series of potential outcomes and routes in my head, though they all end up either running back down the stairs as fast as I can or bashing something into submission with a bat in an adrenaline-fueled frenzy. Adrenaline kicks in, right? That's something that happens. But what if it doesn't? Are you strong enough to fight off whatever may come your way? I shoot a glance over at the dumbbells in the corner of my room, unused, and then over to the ashtray on my windowsill. I cough in reflex and bristle with self-hatred. Fuck it. I'm going up, and I do so. Step by step, I ascend, hands shaking as I rise up into the darkness. The sounds of rain continue, but as I leave my room behind me, I can no longer hear it drum against the glass of my window. Instead, my ears suggest the rain now falls on foliage, leaves, ferns, and forest. My eyes adjust quickly, quicker than one might expect. And I find myself surrounded bizarrely by jungle plant life. The air is suddenly thick with intense humidity. The smell of it strong and rich. I paused and look around. Strange, giant wildflowers quiver subtly in the breezeless wind. The buzzing and whirring of curious insects dance at the edge of my hearing. And I feel myself growing damp. Sweat buds across my skin and rain drips onto my neck and shoulders through gaps in the wooden staircase above me. I strongly consider turning back. I'm way out of my depth here. This is just insane. This is impossible. I'm not the man of action. I really haven't thought this through. I should return back to my bed, back to supposed safety. Like you always do, coward. I feel myself flush. No, not this time. This time I'm going to keep going. I make my decision and take the next step, and the noise echoes in the distance, far above and away. I wait for it to happen again, but it does not, so I carry on cautiously up the stairs, the bat held high. The level of light around me becomes brighter, and awash in green, I confirm without a doubt that I stood in the midst of an enormous rainforest. Bright and foreign moss covers the banisters of the stairs, vines hang down between the steps, and massive vibrant flowers are in bloom all around, nestled amongst the dense undergrowth and brush of the jungle. Step after step I climb, afraid, but emboldened by my own commitment. The way up and ahead is blocked by huge, heavy leaves. I push through them and break above the canopy of the jungle, and then pause for a moment to catch my breath. My mouth falls open in shock as I do so. The stairs above have ceased spiraling, and instead stretch out like a path ahead of me, tucked into the side of the lush green mountain, and rising at only a very steady incline. To my left, the tops of the trees fall away below, out and over an immense and forested valley, before eventually rising back up over more mountains in the far distance. The rain pelts steadily into the horizon from gently churning blue-gray clouds, broken through here and there with rays of glittering light. I am overcome momentarily with a sudden sense of destabilization, of dizziness. I grimace and put a hand on my throbbing temple as I weigh my options. Once again, I consider heading back. I wonder if the staircase might vanish in the manner it had appeared. If it would dissolve from beneath my feet, and I would tumble down through the trees and crash into the rough, wet earth below, trapped forever in this strange land. But the stairs never just disappeared. They never vanish before my eyes. They simply cease to be once I've fallen asleep. They're gone by morning, but I've never been aware of a hugely specific time limit, so to speak. As long as I don't waste my own time, as long as I stay awake, I should be okay. I'm rationalizing, I know it, trying to come up with excuses not to turn back. It's scary, but I've made a commitment. I want to see this through. If I go back down and the stairs never reappear, then I'll never know, will I? I'll never know what lay at the top, and I'll have to live with that choice for the rest of my life. So I continue along my way, and ahead in the distance I hear that noise. The boards of the stairs turned walkaway creak beneath my feet. I hear around me the calls of strange birds and unknown creatures. I wipe the sweat from my forehead as I push through a row of sticky, hanging vines, thankfully to be sheltered again from the rain by a new canopy of greenery overhead. A colorful frog jumps from the wet, slick boardwalk and into the brush as I pass it by. The wooden walkway follows around the edge of the mountain, then turns to amble deeper into its jungle. I stop for a rest, stretching the muscles in my legs, my mouth uncomfortable and dry. I collect a small amount of trickling rainwater from the plants above in my hands and drink it down. The cool liquid, a welcome taste. But the sound of a creaking board of wood has me splutter at once in despair, and I swivel on the spot and look behind me back the way I came. There is nothing there. It's just a trickle of rainwater through the leaves and shadows and trees and ferns, shifting and shimmering, ever so subtly. I hasten onwards and my pace is slightly increased. I pass the towering trees and the trunks which have been carved into terrifying shapes, coiled snakes with heads like human skulls, strange apes, snarling with wooden teeth, their arms ending in handless stumps crossed against their chests, eyeless parrots, their wings poised and tensed as if ready to take flight. Stairs are made to be climbed, I muttered to myself over and over. They appeared for a reason. If this world wanted to harm me, they would have just sent something down into my room. I'm supposed to be here. I repeat this several times. I'm okay. I'm supposed to be here. I climb and climb, following along the railed wooden walkway, up some more steps, and I am faced at its eventual end with a wall of leaves and vines. This is it, I realize. The final opportunity to turn back. Last chance. But if I turn back now, then I will walk with guilt and shame and frustration. And if the stairs never reappear, then I will carry these feelings with me for the rest of my life. So I take a deep breath of hot human rainforest air and pass through. The noise is loud. It reverberates through my surroundings as I make my way onto the other side. I find myself staring at the edge of an enormous wooden temple. A small waterfall rumbles down the rock at the far side of the wide hall, and around me are arches and flittering fireflies glowing gold in the green gloom. Looking up above the wooden arches, the walls of the temple extend high up into the sky with trees, to the extent I cannot see the top, and there's movement all around. Long, creaking, and ever-changing, narrow wooden bridges grind from place to place. Carved gears turn as they splash water onto the boarded floor from up above, and wooden discs that must be at least half my height drop down through gaps. They roll through constantly shifting platforms and changing walls and barriers, and over and across as the bridges as they are carried various routes around the temple. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The clank noise, I realize, is the sound of the bridges suddenly moving, clattering with its agent gear as it directs the flow of the discs down a new path. Stay calm, Devin, I tell myself as I walk through the central hall. My footsteps heavy on the wet planks below. Stay calm. I make my way towards the little waterfall at the far side. I take in the unsettling carved wooden statues around the base of the pillars and the arches, and I realize they are all of me. I swallow, my mouth again dry. Some of the carved copies watch me pass in silence. Some of them have their heads in their hands. Some have turned to look over their shoulders as if checking behind, back to where they came. None of the statues look happy, and there is one of these idols that differ from the rest. It becomes clear as I approach the waterfall, sat cross-legged between two flowing vines in the form of a carved old man. Moss creeps up his sides and his chest. The wood has darkened with age and with water, and atop his neck is a head that is split into two faces, one facing to the left and one facing to the right. The face to the left has a beard that is carved to hang straight down, whilst the beard of the other is curled up and all around his jaw. Neither face has any eyes, and the statue moves. "Devon," says the faces together in a joint voice that sounds like the splitting of a log. I stagger back in alarm, crashing down onto the rain-soaked floor with a cry, barely aware of the pain throbbing in the waves through my elbows as I stare in horror at the unnatural idol before me. "I'm surprised to see you here," says the face with the curled beard. The face on the right, his head cracks around so we are facing each other. An irregularity, for sure. The head cracks around to the left, and the face with the pointed beard speaks in turn. "Well, do you have anything to say?" I stammer in disbelief, in shock, shaking on the ground as the bridges shift softly overhead. The left face sneers. "You have always disgusted me, Devon. You're weak. If you have nothing to say, then be gone." I rise to a shaking stand and respond. "I am not weak." A bridge on the lower level than the others grinds and shifts. I glance up to watch it connect to a new segment of wall, and a series of discs go rolling across it towards their new destination. A statue's head cracks to the right. "Your first chosen words were a statement in place of a question." "I'm impressed," it says. "Perhaps your little journey here has done something for your constitution." Perhaps," I reply, cautiously, heart pounding. "Perhaps you'd like to tell me where my little journey has led me exactly." The mouth of the face on the right stretches into a grin, with the sound of a branch being torn from a tree. "Clever," he says, avoiding another question. "But you did so as a reaction, an act of deference to me. Think for yourself." I swallow. "Well, I've presumed you to be the power in this realm," I reply, running a tongue over my dry lips. And it makes sense to follow the cues of the authority when in unfamiliar territory. "Interesting," the face replies. "I wonder how well your presumptions have carried you thus far." Its head cracks around to the left before I'm able to respond. "What is it that you want, boy?" the face asks. "Speak now, and speak well, or I will cast you out." I grimace and take a slow, calming breath, holding back my fear. I cannot allow myself to break in front of this idol. I can't explain it, but I know that I just can't let that happen. "What is this place? And why? Why did you summon me here?" The face laughed together. "Summon?" the left replies. "Such arrogance. You think I would bother to summon you here deliberately? An agentless worm such as yourself? One with a will free in name only, withered and saddened beyond recognition." The face snaps around to the right. "If I had summoned you here, Devon, you would not have come. Decision-making is not the strength of yours. You avoid." I stand tall, defiant. "But I did. I did come, didn't I? Or do I not stand before you at this very moment?" A bridge pulls out from the wall and slides around to the right angle directly above the statue's head. and a collection of discs roll down along their new path and into the opposite wall above. You haven't answered my question, I tell them. I pause and then, you stand in the temple of process. Your temple of process, to be quite specific, says the face on the right. Probability and chance and choice are all weighed here together, and the outcomes play through down below. The columns and the great walls represent varying aspects of your being. I don't understand, I reply, glancing up at the subtly shifting wooden walls nestled amongst the rainforest canopy above. Of course you don't understand, says the face on the left as its head cracks around. You barely exist at all. It surprises me not that your mind is as dulled as your potential for displacement. What ripples do you create in the water, boy? The statue speaks in riddles. I feel like I can only grasp the gist of what it's saying. I gesture to the column up to my left. Narrow yet deep, filled with an array of platforms, stacked full to the brim with wooden discs. It extends high up into the trees. And what does that one represent? The head on the right cracks around. The column there, in this branch of the temple, shows me a critical component in the matrix of your health. It shows me the likelihood that one of your cells mutating into a poison, a cancer of the flesh, within the next 7 cycles of the moon. I stare up the column in horror. Cancer. Multiple bridges suddenly shift and swell out from all sides of the column, extending out to meet the bridges on the other side of the hall. A cascade of discs fall from the newly shifting platforms and they roll out and across these bridges to their new destinations. What just happened? I asked the statue. Why is the column changing? You just gave up smoking, it replies simply. What? What do you mean? How could I have just given up smoking? How could you know that? 4 questions in one. The face to the right replies sadly, and his head cracks around to the left. It's a truth. A decision was made. Former outcomes have sealed themselves off and new outcomes have opened. Is this how you wish to spend your time here? As a gaping fish, blubbering over the simplest of concepts? And what if I change my mind? I retort, bristling with fear. Just to spite you, let's say I smoke a dozen cigarettes upon the return to my room. The angle of the bridges above me changed slightly, enough to slow down to the descent of the discs. They creak and groan and drip. Then that will be an excuse of will, the face replies. And Janice knows you need it. I stare up the creaking bridges for a moment in thought, then watch as they return to their angles, and the discs continue their descent into the new locations, rolling noisily through the temple. Holy shit. The implications of a place such as this. I am unable to keep myself from playing my entire life out through my head, weighing on all my past choices and decisions, mistakes and triumphs, few as they are, all swirling, crashing, and melting against and into each other. The statue rises to his feet. The motion is horrific. I'd only just gotten used to its faces. Now it stands as an ancient wooden monstrosity, and I can feel a sensation of sickening vertigo twist and tilt my now fragile hold on reality. Get a hold of yourself, boy. The face on the left shouts at me as the bridges begin to shift with rapidity, shaking in the foundations of the temple as they do so. You don't belong here, says the face on the right. Return to your life. Go on as you were. Allow me to return to my peace. How much have I missed? I choke out. How many outcomes have I closed off? How many for good? The statue clenches his fists as splinters rain down upon us. The ground shakes. You wait for a coming change. A great fix, says the face on the right, in a tone deep and solemn. You wait, and you wait, for external forces to push you into one direction or the other. The head cracks around to the left, but you fail to see that there will be no great change. The external forces rush by like wind over the rocks as the cells of your life and your energy mutate. One by one, the head shifts, and both voices speak together. Nothing will come of nothing. And the ground shakes. Get him out. The voices roar, and I spin to see my copies, the statues of myself around the temple, stagger awkwardly from their podiums, stumbling towards me with viciousness, arms outstretched. No, 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 I shout. I can't allow these things to control me. I am the master of my own destiny. I have to be. And I haul the bat up high in a tense and shaking my hands, and bring it around in a wide arc, smashing it into the side of the closest copy's head, with a deep and echoing crack, one which splinters the wood and sends the statue reeling to the floor with a series of loud thuds. I bring the bat up high. I heave it down as hard as I can onto the splintered head. It shatters in a shower of brown and green. I bring the bat around again. I swivel and smack it with grunts of deliberate force into statue after statue, sending them all sprawling to the ground. I back away as I do so, retreating to the temple's entrance and the gate of the vines. I hold the bat up high and I call out to the idol with the two-faced man. I'm going, alright? I'm going. But I'm going on my own terms. Not yours. The decision is mine, and it's mine alone. The statue opens both his mouths, makes to speak again, but I choose not to stay and listen, instead, and run from the approaching statues, sprinting back across the boardwalk through the forest and the rain. I slip and I stumble, but I do not slow. Lightning crackles through the sky in the distance, but I pay it no mind. I hurtle back down along the wooden path and around the edge of the mountainside. I feel the wood beneath me start to creak. I put my hand on a rail for support, and it breaks clean off, falling down into the jungle below. Oh no. Oh fuck. Am I too late? Was I gone too long? The creaks grow in a series of cracks, a loud, rotting tearing. The wood gives way. The planks beneath my feet start to break off and fall through the leaves. Please, I mutter, then louder, please. Just a little longer. A little bit longer. I can see the top of the spiraling staircase. I'm so close, but not close enough. Just as I grab the rail, the entire apparatus collapses. It falls down with the rain through the twisted trees and leaves. I try to grab a hold of something, of anything, but it's too wet. I can't get a grip. The vines, they aren't slowing me down enough. I can't keep my grip. Oh fuck. This is the end. I squeeze my eyes tight shut in panic, calling out for help, for something, for anything. And the air that rushes past my face suddenly cools. The humidity is left in a cloud behind me, and I slam down hard. I land on the carpet of my room, sending a almighty shudder through the floor and the walls. Oh God, I groan. Oh Christ. A moment later, my room door is thrown open. Two of my housemates stand in shock, clearly just roused from sleep, and they stare at me as I lay soaked through and bruised amidst a pile of rotted wood. What the fuck, Devin? Are you okay, man? What the hell was that? I stare at them in confusion for a second or two, gathering my bearings, and then I wince up and turn to look behind me. The stairs, they're gone. The sun has begun its rise and the rain is letting up. It patters gently against the glass of my window, and I laugh. I stagger to my feet, kicking away the wood and nearly falling if not for my housemates jumping forward to help me balance. I thank them and I stumble to my chest of drawers, throwing on a change of clothes from my college bag. Devin, they ask me as I hastily pull on my shoes, what are you doing? Where the hell are you going? It's 5 a.m. I clench my jaw and massage my wrists before hoisting the bag onto my back and pushing towards the door. You know what? I reply with a wave. I'm going to the fucking library. And then